Good afternoon and welcome. This webinar is a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, CFBNP, and the Veterans Health Administration, Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, Education and Training Office. My name is True Lester Pauling. I am the Senior Outreach Specialist in CFBNP. I will be a moderator this afternoon. Everyone's phone has been muted. If you have a question during the presentation today, please type it in the Q&A box on the right of your screen. I will read the questions at the end of the presentation, and the presenter will provide a response. This presentation is not available after this webinar, but a handout will be made available with all the resources Ms. Mells will speak about today. This is a live recording. I would like to thank Ms. Lillie Mells for this collaboration. We are grateful for your time today. But before we get started, I would like to introduce Mr. Conrad Washington, Director of the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Mr. Washington is a retired combat Marine with 20 years of active duty service. Mr. Washington is a licensed minister actively serving in his faith. He received his Master's of Divinity in Pastoral Studies from Moody Theological Seminary. He has a Master's in Business Management and a Bachelor of Science degree in Education. Additionally, he is a graduate of VA's class of 2017 Virtual Expired Leaders Program. I now give you Mr. Washington for today's opening remarks. Mr. Washington.
Hey, True, thank you very much. I appreciate you. Thank all of you for joining us. Before I begin my comments, I want to acknowledge my team. You heard True Lester Pauling there. We have Mr. William Morales in the background, along with Nicholas Walters on the team. So we're 4 strong, trying to reach veterans, families, and beneficiaries and caregivers across the nation through what we do here from Washington, D.C. And I just want you all to know that I appreciate you very much. And also thank all of you for joining us again. Today, we're going to talk about a very sensitive topic, and I want to echo True Lester's comments with thanking Lillie Mells for joining us again, a longtime colleague here in the VA. We appreciate her expertise as a clinician, and we thank her for taking time to present information today that I know will be helpful. I was thinking about things that I could share with you today that will be helpful before we begin the presentation, because I saw the attendees, and I know some of you. The only thing that I can say is that we're in a national crisis. Suicide is a health concern for everyone. And I know that we need assistance. And it's not just a veteran-centric issue. It is a national issue that affects so many people who are non-veterans as well. But we here in the VA, we're concerned about the veterans as well. And so I would ask that you pay attention today. At the end of Lillie's brief, she's going to share some magnificent resources that'll be helpful. And I just hope that you get something out of it. And if you have further questions, please don't hesitate to type those, as True Lester said, in the chat box to the right of the screen. We will address those issues, and Lillie will answer them. So thank you again for joining us, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Be blessed.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. At this time, I would like to introduce Ms. Lillie Mells, who will be providing today's presentation. Please read a summary of her bio on the screen. Ms. Mells is a licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years of experience. She has worked in various capacities to include child abuse, domestic violence, and substance abuse. Lillie is an Air Force veteran and has served as Director of Psychological Health for the Virginia Air National Guard. Lillie has been with the Department of Veteran Affairs since 2013, working in suicide prevention. Currently, she is the Education and Training Program Coordinator at the VA Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. At this time, I give you Ms. Lillie Mells for today's presentation. Lillie?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Ms. Pauling, and thank you, Mr. Washington. Excited to be here and do this presentation. I am going to turn off my camera. Sometimes I get bandwidth issues, and then I'll turn it back on when we're ready for questions and answers. So this is going to be your VA S.A.V.E suicide prevention training. And before we get started, I always like to do a poll to see who we have in the audience. And so I want to know how many military folks we have. So I'm going to go ahead and take a poll. So how many Army folks do we have present? Just drop it in the chat box if you're Army. Okay, I see some Army. Any Navy in there? I know we have at least 3 Marines on the line. Any more Marines in the house? What about my brothers and sisters in the blue? Any Air Force? What about our Guard and Reserve? Any Guard and Reserve men? What about our Coast Guard? Anyone from the Space Force? Okay, I think we got a pretty good representation, The reason I like to take a roll call, I always like to see who's on the line and let folks know that I give appreciation to all branches of the military service. I deployed alongside each branch, including the Guard and Reserve, and you just have a deeper appreciation for each once you know what they bring to the table. So thank you to all of you. Now we're going to go ahead and start it. So as Mr. Washington said, suicide can be an intense topic for many people. So if you need to take a break, step out. We're not going to get into any gory details, but just sometimes the topic alone can bring up a lot of emotions for people. If you need immediate assistance, you can contact the crisis hotline or the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. They both have the same number, which is 988. The difference is for veterans and active duty service members, you just press number 1 and you'll get connected to the VA service members. If you're a civilian, just dial 988 and you'll get a civilian responder. But all will be taken care of immediately. This is what we're going to cover today: facts about veteran suicide, common myths and realities of suicide, VA S.A.V.E steps. This is our introductory suicide prevention training. And then I'm going to give some resources, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes left for some questions and answers. So by participating in this training, you'll have a general understanding of the scope of suicide, veteran suicide in the U.S., how to identify a veteran who may be at risk for suicide, and know what to do when you do identify a veteran at risk for suicide. You can also use these same skills with just anyone else, just how to identify when somebody's at risk for suicide. So now I want you to think about this. What are your biggest questions around suicide and talking to people in crisis? What are your biggest questions around suicide and talking to people in crisis? I want you to hold on to that thought, and maybe after we finish the presentation, that question would have been answered for you. So let's go over some facts about veteran suicide. So as Mr. Washington said, suicide is a national public health problem. It takes more than just the VA to solve this problem. It takes the whole nation. And so suicide, it is a national issue. We have rising rates among the general population and veterans. And for every death by suicide, there's at least 135 individuals impacted. I venture to say in some cases, there may be even more, depending on how involved that individual is in their community, in their neighborhood, in civic organizations, if they're employed, if they're going to school, how big their family is. I venture to say it can be more than 135, but at minimum, there's at least 135 individuals that are impacted. Suicide is a complex issue with no single cause. If we knew a single cause, we could probably combat this issue sooner. So it's often a result of complex interaction of risks and protective factors at the individual, community, and societal levels. Now, risk factors. What are risk factors? These are those things, those obstacles, those challenges that are often associated with increased likelihood of suicidal behavior. Protective factors. These are buffers. These are things that can be used to offset the risk factors. These are skills, tools that people can use. And so what we want to do in the prevention of suicide, we want to maximize the protective factors, increase those, and minimize the risk factors. Get rid of those throughout communities nationwide. So now I'm going to go over some of the risks and protective factors. This is not a comprehensive list. We can add many more things to this list, but these are the ones that we've seen more so than not. And so we're just going to go over a few of them. So prior suicide attempt. Someone who has had a prior suicide attempt is at risk. They're at a greater risk than someone who has not had a suicide attempt. Doesn't mean that they'll go on to have a second attempt, but when we talk about risk, that means that they're at a higher risk than someone who is not engaged in that type of behavior. Next, mental health issues. When we talk about mental health issues, we're talking about untreated mental health issues. How many people you know that are walking around with untreated mental health issues? And there's a whole variety of reasons why people don't seek mental health care. I'm going to ask you all to just drop a few of those reasons in the chat box. Why do you think people don't seek care for mental health issues? And when we talk about mental health issues that are untreated, there are some conditions that if they go untreated, they only get worse over time. And so I see some of you have typed in stigma, they're shamed, for the military folks, possibly losing their security clearance, embarrassed. People have all reasons why they don't seek mental health care. Some people are even told in families that, there's nothing wrong with you. They don't believe in mental health, those kinds of things. But I'm here to say that, people really need to get help for those issues because they don't go away. You can stuff them, you can pretend that they don't exist, but they don't go away, and people end up doing other things to compensate for those untreated issues. And then there are some issues that have to be treated. You can, if you have something like, let's say, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, those conditions have to be regulated. And if they're not treated, it definitely puts that individual at greater risk for suicide. Next on the list, substance abuse. So when we talk about substance abuse, we're talking about mood altering substances. Anytime you engage in the use of mood altering substances, it puts you at a greater risk for suicide because your judgment is off, and people tend to do things when their judgment is off that they normally would not do when they're using sound judgment. Next, access to lethal means. Now, this is huge, especially for the VA. One of the things that we know when it comes to suicide, that weapons, firearms, is the #1 method that's being used. So when someone has access to these type of lethal means, and there are other means, but firearms is the #1 lethal means. But when you have access to things, it puts you at a greater risk. So if you have access to weapons, you have access to stockpiles of medication, things like that, it definitely puts you at a greater risk for suicide. Recent loss. Now, this could be a wide variety of things. It could be loss of limb, loss of a relative or a loved one. It could be loss of job. Just loss in of itself definitely puts individuals at risk. Next, legal or financial issues. When we talk about legal issues, especially when that individual may be facing jail time, it definitely puts a strain on them, and it definitely puts them at a risk for suicide. And then also financial challenges. If you're talking about losing your job, going bankrupt, having to file bankruptcy, losing home, those are things that put individuals at risk. Next on the list is relationship issues. And I will tell you, relationship issues are huge. When you have failed relationships, it almost appears as if you're going through the grieving process. And so when someone loses a person's life, they grieve. And when you have a relationship that fails, many times you go through the same emotions. It could be denial, it could be shame, it could be guilt, it could be anger. These are the same feelings that you feel when you're going through the grieving process. And when people are at risk of losing relationships, they can become very vulnerable. And in many cases, we've seen murder-suicide. So we know that relationships is huge on this list. Next, we have unemployment. So clearly, if you're unemployed and unable to sustain yourself or your family, it definitely puts you at risk And then we also have homelessness. And so, as I said earlier, there can be a lot more things that we can put on that list. We just don't have the bandwidth on one slide to put them all, but there's certainly more things that can be placed on that list. Now let's move over to the other side for protective factors. Now, remember what I said about protective factors. These are things, these are tools, these are buffers, things that you can use when facing challenging situations. So first on the list is access to mental health care. Now, we already talked about why people don't seek mental health care, but when you have access to mental health care and you receive treatment for those conditions, it definitely puts you in a better position than someone who's not being treated. There are some conditions, as I mentioned earlier, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, where it has to be regulated by medication. When people are not engaged in treatment and medication management, it definitely can lead them at a risk of suicidal behavior. So protective factor means in the mental health arena, you're receiving treatment, you're receiving ongoing care for those conditions. And some conditions are lifelong. You know, there are things like anxiety and depression. You can work through those things, but things like schizophrenia, those things don't go away. They have to be managed. Okay. Next on the list is sense of connectiveness. So all you folks that typed in the chat box that you either served or serving in the military, you know what that sense of connectiveness means. When you're behind those gates, it's a community within the community. It's an unspoken relationship that you have with others in uniform. And when you're behind those gates, I mean, you know exactly what your mission is, you know who's in your unit, you know who your battle buddy is, you just know these things. And so sometimes when you leave the military, whether you get out and your enlistment or your commitment or you retire, sometimes you lose that sense of connectiveness. It's no longer there. You know, you see people in the community and you talk about the military, and let's face it, a lot of our civilian counterparts don't understand. They don't know when we're using these acronyms and these terms, and you know, you feel a little bit lost. So having that sense of connectiveness can be a protective factor. And that's why a lot of us who've served, we come back and serve in a different capacity. We work for the VA. We work for veteran service organizations so that we can help other veterans. Next on the list is problem solving skills. Now, I will tell you, if we had more of these skills, we would do much better in life. If we learned problem solving skills as children, we would do much better as an adult. Now, I've got some of my colleagues on the phone on the line, and I've always joked with them. Now, I'm a gal from New York City, and we didn't have a whole lot of problem solving skills. And there's only one problem solving skill that I learned. And if any of you think you know it, put it in the chat box. What kind of problem solving skills do you think I learned as a kid coming out of the streets of New York City? Come on, don't be bashful. Somebody put it in the box. Okay. So one of the things we learned was to use our fist. You know, we fought, you know, and that was our problem solving skill. But I will tell you, it's not a good way to problem solve. And you can't just fight everyone, you know, and your physical fighting can't just turn into verbal fighting. You have to learn how to manage difficult situations. And once you learn problem solving skills, you tend to do better when you get into crisis situation. You tend to be able to manage those better. Next on the list, sense of spirituality. This is very individualized for folks. And so some people will practice formal religion. Some people will go to houses of worship. Some people will meditate, read the Bible. You have to do what works best for you. It's not one size that fits all. It's what works best for that individual. Okay. Next, mission or purpose. When you have a mission or purpose, you feel like you're giving back, that you're doing something meaningful. And so when you're able to do that, you feel like you're productive in the community, productive in society. And remember what I said earlier, that's why a lot of folks go back and they want to help, they want to continue that mission of helping other veterans or helping the community. So when you have something solid like that, is definitely a protective factor. Next, physical health. And I will tell you, the worst thing to do is walk around and physical pain all day long. Now, when we were in the military, we didn't know what pain was because we just pushed through it. And I will tell you, all the years that I served, I never had pain. I never had pain until my military duty was over, and I had more pain than I could ever speak of. And I thought, what is going on? And it's because I ignored it. You know, I ignored the back pains. I ignored the knee pains. I ignored the headaches. You ignore all that stuff, but it doesn't go away. And so when you get out, you realize that I was just pushing through all of this, and really I should have taken care of it. So what I'm here to say is that, you know, a protective factor is having good physical health, getting those annual checkups, getting treated for those ailments that have been lingering that you ignored. Make sure that you're taking care of your health. Next, employment. Employment is always a positive protective factor because that means that you're able to support yourself and your family, you know, have a shelter, food, those kinds of things. When you're unable to do that, it does put you at risk for suicide. I mean, think about families that are unable to support themselves. You don't want to be able to go home and not be able to feed your children, not be able to take care of your spouse, not have a place to live. You know, it's a very difficult situation to be in. And so when you're employed, gainfully employed, it's definitely a positive protective factor. Next, social and emotional well-being. So, you know, you want to get involved in things that are worthwhile. You want to make sure that you're doing something to impact your community, you know, your life. You know, people retire, and sometimes people do jobs that have nothing to do with their military career because they want to give back in a different way. And so when you're doing those things, they're definitely positive in terms of your emotional well-being and helping others. When you help others, it definitely can help you as well. And that could be a good protective factor. Okay, so let's move on to some of the key findings of our 2022 Veteran Suicide Annual Report. Now, I know this data is a little bit old. We do have the new report that's out. We just have not been given the opportunity to update that data yet. So I'm just going to go over this a little bit really quickly. But as you can see, we had 6,796 deaths, and that was back in 2018. And then in 2020, there was 6,146. So there was a slight dip, but I will tell you, as someone working in this field for a number of years, it's not a number that we can celebrate. You know, 6,000 deaths is way too many. And it's not a number that we can celebrate until we can drill down these digits. I don't really care to talk about these numbers because it's not a huge impact. We need to have a larger impact to really talk about these numbers. Next, if we look at the suicide rate by age and sex, this is not surprising that the age range is still 18 to 34. That's the highest rate. 35 to 54 is next. 55 to 74 is the last group. But our 75 and older, those numbers are starting to creep up. So you can see there's 32%, 75 and older. Okay. And veterans, in terms of suicide, is still leading the pack versus non-veterans. That's both on the male and the female side. Now, earlier I talked about access to lethal means. And so when we talk about lethal means, these are some of the ones that we're talking about. Firearms, poisoning, suffocation. Other can be a combination of things. The numbers are just too small to really have its own category. It could be, you know, jumping from a height or ramming your vehicle into a fixed object. But take a look at firearms. Firearms is leading every category. Okay. Firearms is the #1 method that's being used by not only veterans, but civilians as well. So we look at the numbers in 2020. Over 50% of adults use firearms as a means of suicide. Okay. Look at the next column. 71% of veterans use firearms. Non-veteran men, 55%. Veteran men, 72%. Non-veteran women, 33%. Look at the number of veteran women, 48%. That was an increase by almost over 11%. One of the things that the VA has done is that we have started to foot stomp lethal means safety and lethal means safety education, storage and education. What we found is that providers had to be educated more, veterans and their family members. And so this is a big push from the VA to educate veterans about safety, locking up those firearms, family members about locking up those firearms, and providers on how to talk to veterans about the use of firearms and locking them up. If you look at the other categories, they don't even come close. Poisoning, suffocation, they don't even come close to firearms. And so this is why we had to do more in terms of lethal means safety and lethal means safety storage as well. Now, why is lethal means safety important? In the context of suicide prevention, safe storage of lethal means is any action that builds in time and space between the suicidal impulse and ability to harm oneself. I'll say that again. Any action that builds in time and space between a suicidal impulse and the ability to harm oneself. So really what we're trying to do is get to that individual. Once that thought comes in their head, that's the time where we have to intervene. We're trying to intervene before they act on that thought. And so effective lethal means safety in education and counseling, as I said earlier, it's veteran-centered. It respects the important role of firearms in a veteran's life. Now, way back, the VA would think in terms of if a veteran was suicidal and they owned a weapon, immediately it was contact the authorities, have the weapon removed. That person would never, ever have that weapon again. We realized that it didn't work because then people was not going to be as forthcoming about owning a weapon. They would not tell if they had a weapon if they knew it was going to be confiscated. So we had to change the narrative and say, okay, we understand you own a weapon. You're going through a crisis. Can we get you to secure that weapon, safely get it locked up, pass it over to a trusted friend or family member until you get through that crisis? And what we found with that, it seemed to work much better than just taking the weapon away and never handing it back over again. And so that's where we had to really educate the veterans, the family members, and the providers. And so most suicidal crises are brief. The time for the decision to act is usually less than 1 hour. And you can see the percentages right there, less than 5 minutes, 24%, less than 20 minutes, 48%, and within an hour, 71%. And if you look to the right side of the screen, the fatalities. Firearm injury is almost a 90% fatality. All other methods, 5%. So that tells you firearms is the #1 method. Okay. Next, lethal means safety works. So reducing lethal suicide methods is one of the few population level interventions that has shown to decrease suicide rates. And about 90% of people who survive a suicide attempt do not necessarily go on to die by suicide. So what we had to do is collaborate early enough with the veterans, their family members, and the providers. And when we've done that, we have likely helped that individual survive crisis for the rest of their lives. Now, suicide is preventable. Despite what you may hear, it is preventable. So I want you guys to get ready and type some information in the chat box. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and you're going to type in either myth or reality. So get ready, myth or reality. First question, people who talk about suicide are just seeking attention. Is that a myth or reality? Okay, I see a lot of myths in the box. I see a lot of myths in the box. Okay, so you are absolutely right. So no matter how casually or jokingly said, suicide threats should never be ignored, and they may indicate serious suicidal feelings. Someone who talks about suicide provides others with an opportunity to intervene before those behaviors occur. So even if someone has a thought and they even say they want to kill themselves, they may not actually have a plan to to do that. But you want to intervene because clearly it shows that they're in a crisis. Okay, so you never want to ignore it. You never want to take it as a joke. Okay. Next question. The only one who can really help someone who is suicidal is a mental health therapist or counselor. Is that a myth or reality? The only one who can really help someone who is suicidal is a mental health counselor or therapist. Okay, I see in the box, I have several myths and one reality. And it's a myth. Special training is not required to safely raise the subject of suicide. So helping someone feel included and showing genuine heartfelt support can make a big difference during a challenging time. Many times, if you're just a good listener, show some compassion, you probably have gone a long way. Validate that individual, you have gone a long way. So you don't necessarily have to be a professional counselor or therapist. Now I'm going to go over our Operation S.A.V.E. And this is, as I said earlier, it's our entry-level suicide prevention training. It's going to help you act with care and compassion if you encounter someone who's in a suicidal crisis. S, the signs of suicidal thinking should be recognized. A, ask the most important question of all. So I'm going to ask you guys that. What is the most important question of all? Let me see what you put in the chat box. Ask the most important question of all. What question is that? Okay, I saw one question. Okay. Well, I'm not going to give you an answer just yet. I'm going to finish, and then when we get to A, I'll give you the answer. V, validate the veteran's experience or that person's experience. E, encourage treatment and expedite getting help. So let's start with A. Signs of suicidal thinking. So learn how to recognize these warning signs. Hopelessness. You're going to see a lot of that in our veteran population. You know, it's very difficult to serve, get out, go in the community. It's a different world. It's a very different world. And sometimes as a veteran, the community doesn't really understand us. You know, they don't understand that way of life. They don't understand, you know, how we lived, how we do things, people deploying, coming back to the US and seeing a very different world than what they saw during deployment. So you might see a lot of hopelessness, feeling like there's no way out of their situation. You might see some anxiety. How do you recognize anxiety? Anxiety is that feeling of nervousness. Some people actually have physical symptoms. Some people can feel nauseated. Some people can feel churning sensation in their stomach. Some people can feel a rapid heart rate. Some people will feel like they're having a full-blown panic attack. Okay. Some will also feel claustrophobic. But anxiety, agitation, sleeplessness, or mood swings, feeling like there's no reason to live. And then we have rage and anger. The rage and anger is usually a mask for other issues. And in the mental health arena is usually a big mask for depression and anxiety. So when you pull back those layers of rage and anger, you will generally find some mental health issues underneath. Okay. And especially with our military population, we are very good at masking our feelings and our emotions. Okay. Next, engaging in risky activities without thinking. I've seen a lot of that. You may have even seen some of it. People out on the road, people on motorcycles, driving at high rates of speed, no helmet, weaving in and out of traffic. It's very risky to do it. Very risky. Okay. Increasing alcohol and drug use. And remember what I said earlier, anytime you ingest a mood altering substance, it puts you at risk for suicide. Okay. And withdrawing from family and friends. More signs of suicidal thinking. So the presence of the following signs require immediate attention. So thinking about hurting or killing themselves. Looking for ways to die. And believe me, there's 1,000,001 things that people can do to the 10th power. Talking about death, dying, or suicide. And then self-destructive or risk-taking behavior, especially when it involves alcohol, drugs, and weapons. And remember, weapons are our #1 use for suicide. So you put that in a combination with alcohol and drugs, not a good combination. Okay, now we're going to get to that A, asking the question. So I'm going to give you 10 more seconds to write a question in the box. Know how to ask the most important question of all. What question is that? Okay, I see some questions in the box. Okay, so let me give you the answer. The question is, are you thinking about killing yourself? That's the question you want to ask, and that's the way you want to ask it. And the reason we want to ask it this way is that we don't want to have any confusion about what the answer will be. You see, if I say to you, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Well, hurt can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people, But if I say, are you thinking of killing yourself? Kill is only one definition of kill. But hurt, there can be many definitions of hurt. So you want to make sure you ask this question that way so that there's no confusion about what you're asking that individual. Next, you want to keep these tips in mind when you're asking that question. You do want to ask that question if you identify those warning signs, okay? The helplessness, the anxiety, the rage, the anger. You want to ask this question if you have identified those warning signs. You do want to ask the question in a natural way that flows with the conversation. So you want to make sure that it's in context with that conversation. Remember earlier I said someone can have a thought, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have a plan or intend to act on that thought. However, you still want to ask that question because if they're talking about suicide, you want to make sure that you know. Okay? It's a question that you want to ask, especially when those type of conversations take place. If someone is saying, I could just kill myself, they may not actually have a plan. But clearly, there's things that are going on that they need help with, and you want to be able to flesh that out. Now, there are some things that you don't want to do when you're asking that question. So don't ask the question if you're looking for a no answer. So if I'm looking for a no answer, I would say, you're not going to kill yourself, are you? If I say you're not going to kill yourself, I've already answered the question for the individual. So there's no way that they could answer me honestly. Okay? Another example with that, and my colleagues on the line already know this. I have a daughter who always wants to wear these Crocs shoes, Crocs. Those shoes, they look like rubber shoes to me. I don't like the shoes. I don't think they should be worn outside. They should be worn on the beach. However, my daughter, every opportunity she gets, she wants to wear those shoes to school, anywhere. And so one of the things I always say to her, Nicole, those shoes aren't really for school. And so if I don't want her to wear those shoes, if she puts those shoes on, this would be my response to her. You're not wearing those shoes, are you? If I say you're not wearing those shoes, that means no. There's no way she could say, yes, I'm wearing these shoes. If I say you're not wearing those shoes, are you? It's not really a question. I've already answered it. But if I wanted to give her the opportunity to give me her honest answer, I would say, Nicole, what shoes are you wearing today? And then she can answer honestly. Okay? So you don't want to say you aren't going to kill yourself. That's already answering the question. Are you thinking about killing yourself? That gives the person the opportunity to answer honestly. Don't wait to ask the question when someone's halfway out the door. You want to ask it early so that you can intervene early. V, validate that person's experience. I will tell you, when you validate someone, you make them feel like they matter, their opinion matters. It's huge. So when you validate someone, you give them the opportunity to say what's on their mind. Remember, as individuals, we're told to be quiet, shut up, basically our entire lives. So when you give that person the opportunity to express themselves, you're really validating them. So talk openly about suicide. Be willing to listen and allow that person to express their feelings. Recognize that the situation is serious because it is. Don't pass judgment. We know as human beings, we can pick up very easily when someone's judging us. And so don't pass judgment. People have had all kinds of issues in their lives. Don't pass judgment. Reassure them that help is available because help is available. E, encourage treatment and expedite getting help. So what should you do if you think someone is suicidal? You don't want to keep it a secret. Okay, that's not the type of secret you want to keep. I don't care if it's a close friend, family member, and they swear you to secrecy. That's not the type of secret you want to keep. Okay? Don't leave that person alone. Remember what I told you? There's 1,000,001 things that you can do to the 10th power. Even if they're in a room alone, believe me, there's something in that room that they can find. Don't leave that individual alone. Try to get the person to seek immediate help from his own doctor or the nearest emergency room. You want to make sure that they're able to do that. Be a good friend and go with them to the emergency room. Okay? Call 911. Reassure them that help is available. Also, call the Veterans Crisis Line or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 988. For veterans or active duty service members, press 1 after you dial the number. Everybody else, just hold the line and you'll be taken care of immediately. When talking with a person at risk of suicide, you want to remain calm. These are some of the things that you want to keep in mind. Remain calm. Don't get all riled up and excited. It's not going to help the situation. You want to listen more than you speak. Okay? You want to maintain good eye contact. Make sure that you're making eye contact with that individual. Act with confidence. You may not know everything to do, but at least act with confidence. Don't argue with that individual. And believe me, there's a million and one topics that you can argue over. We can all argue over politics, abortion, religion. Stay away from all those controversial topics. Everyone has their heels dug in. It will just be a pissing contest. So don't argue with the individual. Use open body language. Don't be like Macaulay Culkin on Home Alone with the shock face. You want to be inviting. Use open body language. Limit your question. Let that person do the talking. Remember what I said earlier? Sometimes, when you're growing up, people are basically shut down. They're told you should be seen and not heard. Don't speak. Be quiet. Let that person express their feeling. Many times when people are in crisis, they need an opportunity to vent. Let them express their opinion. Let them talk. Use supportive, encouraging comments. Be honest and let them know that there's no quick solution, but help is available. Okay? And what do you do if someone expresses suicidal ideation during a phone call? You want to keep that person on the line. Don't hang up or transfer the call. Don't hang up or transfer the call. I will tell you, I'm not really good at transferring calls. When I'm in the office, I just don't transfer enough calls during the day to really become good at it. And so if I have someone who's in crisis on the line, that is not the time that I want to figure out how to transfer a call. Okay? Don't hang up. Keep them on the line. Remain calm. Try to get as much identifying information on that caller as possible. Okay? And it doesn't matter what you get, just get information, name, phone number, current location, even if they go by a nickname, just get as much information as you can, okay? You can conference call to the Veterans Crisis Line. That's only if you really know how to do it. I mean, our call center operators and our switchboard operators, those are the folks who really do this on a regular basis. And there is a way to do it where you can conference call and you don't hang up until the responder actually has the call and you can hear the two individuals talking. But you have to really be good at that to do it. You can get coworkers to assist you via instant messaging in Teams, or if you have more than one cell phone, like those of us working for the government, we have a government cell phone and we have our own personal cell phone, and sometimes you may have to use both. If you have Microsoft Teams, you don't even have to be in the same city or state. You can message someone to assist you while you're on the line with a caller. If the caller disconnects, call them back immediately. If no answer, you want to go ahead, call 911 and ask them to do a welfare check. And after you've done with 911, then you want to go ahead and call 988 because that's the crisis line and they're going to follow up as well. Okay. And that was your S.A.V.E briefing really quickly in a nutshell. Signs of suicidal thinking should be recognized. Ask the most important question of all, and that question is, are you thinking of killing yourself? Validate that person's experience, make them feel like they're important, let them be heard, encourage treatment, and expedite getting help. So now I'm going to move over to some of our resources. And so this is the Veterans Crisis Line. That number has changed from last summer to 988. We used to have the 10-digit number, so this is awesome. Now folks can just dial 988 as if they're dialing 911, and it's for crisis. And if it's a veteran, service member, family member, or friend, you can press number 1 and get connected immediately to a VA responder. Everyone else, hold the line and it'll be a civilian responder. The crisis line was stood up in 2007 and it's been going strong ever since. Over almost 7 million calls, over 800,000 chats, almost 300,000 texts, and over 1.3 million referrals. And this slide is a little bit old. This was early of last year. We had over 269,000 dispatch of emergency services. Those numbers probably have gone up. We will have that in our updated data. Find a local suicide prevention coordinator. That's our SPCs. We have one at every medical facility, and in some cases we have more than one, just depending on how big the facility is. And those individuals, they actually receive direct referrals from the Veterans Crisis Line. So if someone calls the crisis line and they're in a crisis, but they say they do a risk assessment, they are not in danger of killing themselves or harming anyone else, and they can get a referral. The referral will be sent to the nearest VA suicide prevention coordinator, and they have 24 hours to reach out to that individual. Now, if they're in an immediate crisis, then emergency services will be sent out immediately. And we have our veteranscrisis.net resource locator. So you can go on this webpage and put in your city and zip code, and you can get the nearest VA medical center, you can get the community-based outpatient center, you can get the vet center, and you can get the contact information for the nearest suicide prevention coordinator. Making the Connection. This is a series of vignettes from real veterans who talk about their struggle with mental health issues and how they got help and how they're doing currently. So this is a good tool to use, especially for someone who's not sure about seeking mental health care. So these are real vets giving real testimonies of their care. Practice safe storage of firearms, medication, and other lethal methods means. This is keepitsecure.net. And so we have used this in conjunction with the National Sports and Shooting Foundation. They have partnered with the VA to promote keeping it secure and the Veterans Crisis Line. And as a matter of fact, their convention is going on as we speak this week. New lethal means safety resources. Remember, family members, providers, and veterans being educated on reducing firearms and other household safety risks. And so, yes, we know firearms is number one, but there are other household safety risks as well. Medications, some people have samurai knives and things like that. So making sure that there's safety resources in the home. Mental health mobile apps. These are free apps that you can download. PTSD app, COVID coach app. What we recommend is that you use these apps in conjunction with your therapist, and they're not made to be your only source of treatment. So you can use them in conjunction with your therapist. Safety plan, now in the PTSD coach app. And so this is one that I had the luxury to work on. So a safety plan is a written list of coping mechanisms that an individual can use during crisis. And so you can have this on your phone. There's 6 steps. You fill out the plan on your phone, and when you're in a crisis, you can pull it up and refer back to those steps and use them. And use it in conjunction with your provider, your therapist as well. Coaching in the care. We have a lot of military individuals who don't feel that they need care, don't want to get care, and family members are struggling because they can see things that the individual is not seeing. And so this program actually helps family members, loved ones, giving them support to get that veteran into care. And they'll give some quick tips, and in some cases they'll actually speak to the veteran as well. LGBTQ. So there's a lot of information and resources coming out. And so the VA just want to make sure that it's online and on board and getting the information out to those who have served who are LGBTQ. Postvention resources. We don't talk about postvention a lot, but we have to be cognizant that things do happen in our community. And so we have to be ready in the workplace and in the community. And so we have our MyREC, which is our mental health research center, and they have a whole host of information on postvention. And in Psych Armor, they produced our VA SAVE training, which is about a 25-minute training on the internet. And you can take this training free of cost. The only thing you have to do is just register for it. We're actually in the process of updating some of the videos, but you can still go on and take that training. It doesn't cost anything. We encourage you to get it out to your communities as well. And then that's it for my presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Ms. Pauling.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mells, for that presentation today. It was very informative. We're going to get to some of the questions right now. We have a few questions, Lillie. The first question comes from Boots Whitlock. He says, I'm curious about the suicide rate among those that are in mental health care. Do we have those numbers, Lillie?
I don't know, have those readily available, but I will tell you this. Many of the folks that are engaged in VA care, those are the least numbers. The numbers that we're getting are folks that are not engaged in VA care and those out in rural areas. But I don't have the specific numbers, no.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Whitlock, for that question. In addition to that, he says, the reason I ask is that it is difficult to find someone to help if they don't want to be found. But of those that can be reached, how many commit suicide? Do we have those numbers?
No, I couldn't give you that offhand. I couldn't get, but our annual report, you could take a look at the annual report, and you could probably Google that, Veterans Affairs Suicide Prevention Annual Report, and you can read through that, and there will be some numbers in there.
Okay, Mr. Whitlock, we'll provide that report to you. The second question comes from Reverend Matthew Mays. I wonder if the big increase of women firearms suicide is partially due to the increase of women in armed combat units.
That I wouldn't necessarily say. I think women veterans are arming themselves. They're familiar with weapons. They know how to clean weapons. They know how to put them together. They know how to shoot. And veterans in of itself, it just seems to be the highest number of the method that's being used. Because women in combat have been around for a while.
Thank you, Lillie, for that response. And thank you, Reverend Mays, for that question. Next question coming from Barbara Lynch. Are there any numbers available on how many direct survivors of suicide actually survived after the trauma? Also, what, if any, resources are available to the survivors?
Well, there are some resources for survivors. You know, suicide is a very touchy subject. Many people are not going to share that very readily, that they have survived. And so we figure that people are going to be somewhat embarrassed about, engaging in that behavior. So we don't readily have those numbers, but there are programs out there for survivors. There's the National Alliance of Mental Illness, SAMHSA has some information as well. And then within their local community, there should be groups within the VA for survivors.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lynch, for that question. Next question comes from Tracy Turner. In context of talking about death, dying, or suicide, how do we, if it's not a figure of speech, how can you tell?
I'm sorry, read that question again.
Tracy Turner, it comes from Tracy Turner, and she asks, in context of talking about death and dying or suicide, how do we know if it's not a figure of speech? How can we tell if they're talking about suicide?
Well, I think it depends on what's going on with that individual. You have to look at the whole person. If things are changing with this individual, if they're going through some issues and all of a sudden they're talking about things that they really haven't talked about before, like, I don't want to be here, I'm tired of this, those kind of things. That's what you want to look at. You want to look at those signs, what's going on in their life. Are they facing some of these difficult issues? Are they facing financial issues? Are they facing medical issues, catastrophic illnesses, cancer, HIV, those kind of things? what is that person dealing with? You know, what are they dealing with? And that's where it comes out in that questioning.
Thank you very much, Ms. Turner, for your question, and thank you for your response, Ms. Mells. Next question comes from Sarah Shirley. How do I become a S.A.V.E trainer?
Well, there's not really, you know, the S.A.V.E is through the VA. So those of us that work in the VA, those are the ones that provide the training. But we don't have a trainer. It's not a clinical training. It's just a training for the community.
Thank you. And our last question comes from Shonda Holland. What if they refuse to give the correct name, address, or phone number? In addition, and they refuse to be transferred to the crisis line for fear of being locked up or checked on? What do you do?
Well, I think, you know, if someone is calling you, I mean, are they calling you on an anonymous line? I mean, there should be a number that's popping up if they're calling you. You have to continue to keep them engaged on the phone. You can offer for them to talk to the crisis line themselves. You can offer, what can I do to assist you? What can I do to help you? Is there any friend or family member out there that can assist you? What do you normally do when you're in crisis? Where are the places that you can go? Where can we get you help?
Thank you so much. And there were some comments from Carlos Diaz on the Q&A as well, Ms. Mells, and we're going to ask you to look at those and to provide a response to him and help for him. That is the last question for today. We thank you so much for your presentation, Ms. Mells. As always, it was so engaging and informative. At this time, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Mr. Washington for closing remarks.
There we go. Thank you very much, True. Lillie, thank you. Good to see you again. We appreciate your great information. I think we had a few minutes to hit a couple of questions. We had some additional questions, if you don't mind. I think one question was, what if they refuse to give their correct name, address, or phone number, Lillie?
I think we answered that.
What about, and they refuse to be transferred to the crisis line? We had that one too?
That was the one, the last one that is
Okay.
yeah.
I just want to make sure. I know I've seen things pop up on the screen. Forgive me. Thank you all for joining us. We will be back at this next week for rural engagement. Same time, same place. Next week, we look forward to seeing y'all. Have a blessed week. Take care. Take care, Lillie.
Thank you, as always.
Thank you for joining the webinar today. If you registered for this event, we will provide you with today's resources, not the presentation, but the resources. A recording of this webinar will be provided on our website at a later date. Please subscribe to our website and Facebook for future webinars and sharing of information. This adjourns today's webinar. Thank you for joining today, and goodbye.